So I was very, very involved in this, and we wrote the definitive study of this. Now, here's the thing. If you're a detective and you find a body with a bullet hole in the head, but there was no witnesses, it doesn't mean you can't prove the crime. It just means you need some other kind of evidence. If you don't have eyewitness evidence, you use DNA. Well, the DNA equivalent in stock markets is statistical evidence, and there were numerous academic studies, and they're all cited in my book. My book has 300 footnotes, so I don't make things up. There's tons of documentation. Any reader can go find the source material. That there was no question that the put buying, by the way, put buying is a bet that the stock's going to go down, before 9/11 was enormous. It would be as if, a guy ordered one ham and cheese sandwich for lunch every day for 10 years, and then one day he ordered 300 ham and cheese sandwiches. That's the kind of put buying we saw in the last 5 trading days prior to 9/11. I met at CIA headquarters with John Mulhern. John Mulhern was the head of one of the 4 largest specialists on the New York Stock Exchange. He was the market maker in American Airlines stock. And I looked at him, I said, John, was there insider trading in American Airlines ahead of 9/11? He said, it was the most blatant case of insider trading I've ever seen. And by the way, since my book came out, Alex, it's kind of interesting. There are people with additional information who have contacted me. They've come forward almost like they want to get something off their chest. So there are stories that are not in my book because these people contacted me after the book came out. But one of the most chilling stories, a fellow came to me. He was a dealer at one of the so-called primary dealers. They're the biggest banks in the government securities market. He handles sovereign wealth funds, which are the biggest traders in the government securities market. So here's a guy, the biggest trader for the biggest dealers in U.S. government securities. On September 10th, the day before 9/11, he was actually out of the office at an outing. His phone rang. His trading assistant said, hey, there's someone on the phone. They want to buy $2 billion of 2-year Treasury notes. Now, $2 billion is an enormous order. The biggest firms, they might trade 100 million at a time or sometimes larger. $2 billion of 2-year notes is an off-the-charts order. This customer had never called before. It wasn't as if it was a long-standing customer, and it was a sovereign wealth fund. He didn't tell me the name of the country, but I think you can infer that it might be Saudi Arabia. And then he did the trade. Of course, the next day, 9/11 comes, those securities soared in value, so that trader made a fortune, and then he never heard from the customer again. So, when someone who's never spoken to you before calls the day before the attack, buys $2 billion of 2-year notes, the next day the attack comes, the securities go up, the guy makes a fortune, walks away, never heard from him again. This is the kind of stuff that was going on. It was going on a very large scale. Not even all the stories have come out. So, no question about insider trading. Now, where I fault the government was for not looking. And just to bring that story forward to the present day and what we were talking about earlier, Alex, with the death of the dollar, we all know what happened in Ukraine in March and April of 2014 this year, just prior to the invasion. Russia, which owns a lot of U.S. Treasury securities in its central bank, started dumping U.S. Treasuries last October. Was anybody looking at that? And it was, if you're Russia and you know you're going to invade Crimea and you think the U.S. is going to push back with economic sanctions, you want to mitigate the impact of the sanctions by lightening your load of U.S. Treasury securities. Well, they started doing that in October. So my criticism of the U.S. government is not that they were in on it. I think that's nonsense, but that they weren't looking then. They're not looking now. And these techniques that you need to look at it are not that difficult because hedge funds do it every day.
Sure. James, though, look, obviously you're a smart guy. I know you got brought in by the CIA to do this report because there are good people in all these agencies. There's also bad actors and bad subgroups. Some history's shown that. Clearly, when you had some of the supposed hijackers trained at U.S. bases in all sorts of spy training, and then that got covered up, clearly you had Iraq being attacked, not Saudi Arabia. Clearly, you have the police state being set up on the backs of the attack of 9/11, the lying about the dust. When I say inside job, I mean the system stood to gain from this on so many fronts. And it's Saudi Arabia right now driving the bus with these attacks and this new invasion of Syria and Iraq, that certain power structures, Carlyle Group and others, stood to gain from this. And there's enough to investigate it. I mean, even 6 of the 10 commissioners have said the official story did not reflect reality. So what do you say to that?
Well, you can gain from it and not know why you're gaining, and that happens all the time. Let me give you a very simple example. So let's say a very small trade goes through. So there's someone with inside information. They know the attack is coming. They do a trade. Now, who would that person be? Well, it could be a cook, a driver, a safe house operator, an associate, a brother, father, sister, mother. Everyone has a social network, and there was definitely a wider group than the hijackers themselves, of course, who knew about this attack coming. And people in that position cannot resist some insider trading. And when people are skeptical of that, they say, why would you compromise operational security? I have a two-word answer, which is Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart was a legitimate billionaire. She made $1 billion through honesty and hard work, but she ended up behind bars because she couldn't resist a little securities fraud involving a tip on insider trading. So that's the human nature side of it. Now, here's what happens. So that trade goes through. Now, there was no news that day. If somebody's buying put options and there's bad news about the airlines, that's one thing. But when the market's going up, the sector's going up, all the other airlines are going up, and someone's buying puts on United Airlines and American Airlines, and there's no news, then you know somebody knows something you don't. So you might buy more put options yourself. That doesn't make you a criminal or an insider trader. It just makes you actually a very smart trader. This is what's called the piggyback, or technically the name for it is signal amplification. So by the end of the day, it's not surprising that there was a massive volume of puts.
Sure, I understand word of mouth. I mean, if you told one person, I found a bunch of gold laying around at the foot of this hill, and in 10 hours, there'd be 100 people out there looking for gold, and there'd be people looking for gold 100 years after the gold was already picked up. That rumor would never die. I get signal amplification. What I don't get is Mayor Willie Brown, San Francisco Chronicle, on screen September 12th, told not to fly to New York by Condoleezza Rice, it turned out, National Security Advisor, on September 10th. Joint Chiefs of Staff canceled a meeting in New York 2 days before 9/11. Source, ABC News. I mean, my issue here is you look at problem, reaction, solution, and the radical transformation of America into a police state that you were just talking about earlier, and the NSA and the rest of it, and you see the wrong country attacked, not Saudi Arabia, but Iraq. I mean, you can see why people don't buy into the official story, because if you questioned insider trading, they said, oh, you're a liar, it doesn't exist. If you questioned our sickening relationship with Saudi Arabia, oh, they're perfect, shut up, you're racist. I mean, I think that's why people don't buy the official story of 9/11.
Well, look, I'm a simple guy, Alex. I stick to facts. And look, I get attacked by the mainstream for talking about insider trading ahead of 9/11. I get attacked by the truthers for not buying into controlled demolition of World Trade Center 7. So I probably have it right if I'm on that middle ground. By the way, this stuff about, as I said, I was there. The armchair engineers can think what they want. I was there. There was nothing controlled about that. There was not a demolition. I mean, I was inside the American Express building on the 17th floor, which was Lehman Brothers headquarters at the time. The face of the building was ripped off. So I'm inside the building looking out at a blue sky with girders stuck into that space with the face of the building ripped off by what was really a wave of metallic debris that came over because there was so much of it. That was not a controlled demolition. By the way, the biggest tenant in World Trade Center 7, the United States government. So why would the U.S. government have a plot to blow up its own office and kill its own people? This is where these things fall down.
Well, they could put a lot of the records there, FBI, CIA, all based there, and the criminal group within government could then run the operation out of there and then burn it down. But listen, let's shift gears out of that. I respect people who disagree with me legitimately and who bring up real issues, and just to expand on what Kaiser had told me, that specifically you have interviewed people who were there at the terminals and could see the insider trading coming in and were basically blocked, not you specifically, but you wrote that report. So I appreciate your courage. I mean, I've already scanned through some of your book. I'm familiar with your work. I mean, I think you're being very truthful about warning the people, and we appreciate you. So I don't think there should be some orthodoxy of heresy where we politically burn you at the stake if you don't, with your own perspective, agree with everything we're saying. I mean, the 9/11 truthers all fight with each other and have hundreds of different views. I get what you're saying. I don't think it's evil to look at it as an inside job. I don't think it's evil to not look at it as that. I think what we both agree is this. Regardless, it's been used to take our liberties, and our borders are basically wide open right now, and they haven't let a good crisis go to waste. They've used this to bring the military-industrial complex home, and we need to reverse this right now. It's not keeping us safe.
Well, that will get worse, Alex, and just on a going forward basis when this financial crisis comes. People are going to find, yeah, there's a lot of concern. Gee, not everybody can get out at once. People are going to find that they can't get out, that they're not going to be able to withdraw savings from the banks. The banks, that's the so-called bail-in. So their accounts are going to be blocked. ATMs are going to be shut off. Major institutions are going to be told that they cannot sell. It's not a question of, gee, can I sell at a good price? You won't be able to sell. So the architecture of the bail-in writ large is already there, and I'll be talking about that in future interviews. But the crisis is going to be a lot worse, but the response is going to be much more draconian.
Well, there you go. The bail-in. Spend a few more minutes if you can. Come back as soon as you want to get into that in great detail. We now see them announcing in Europe, places like Spain, oh, we want a tax on your money in the bank account. But it's only going to start, at a low percentage point. Oh, the Cyprus model. And then we see the laws and regulations being changed, the real-time surveillance of every financial system to do just that. That's the word I'm getting from, as you have contacts, I have contacts at, I'm not going to even say, at president level of major banks, big five banks. And they're scared and asking me what they think they should do. And then I'm asking them. It's kind of like we're passing a hand grenade around to each other with musical chairs. What's going to happen when they do a bail-in and you don't just can't get your money out, now they're stealing it?
Well, that's exactly right. And I do think, as I said, the next crisis is going to be bigger. It's going to be bigger than the Fed. That they hope it goes away, but it's not going away. The economy, we're in a depression. We're going to stay in that indefinitely. It's just a matter of time. By the way, if you look at the very low volatility of the last 5 years, the period that it resembles most was 2002 to 2007. In other words, the period from 2009 to 2014, if you graph it by various metrics, it looks exactly like the period from 2002 to 2007. And we all know what happened next. So get ready.
And the derivatives overhang hasn't been dialed back. It's only been increased.
Well, that's right. And by the way, that's another interesting phenomena. This is a little bit technical, but the Fed is now experimenting with a massive exercise in what's called reverse repo. And I'll explain that very simply. Reverse repo is the Fed has all these government securities. How did they get them? Well, they printed money and they bought the government securities from the dealers, from the banks. And that's how they print money and get it out to the banking system. The problem is the dealers and the banks need the government securities as collateral for the derivatives because they want to leverage 10 to 1 or 100 to 1, et cetera, do the derivatives to prop up the asset markets. But when I do a derivative with you, I do a swap with you, you're like, hey, Jim, how do I know you're good for the money? Well, one of the ways you know is I'll send you treasury securities as collateral. So that's your guarantee that I'm going to perform my end of the deal. Well, what happens when the Fed buys up all the securities and the banks no longer have the securities to post as collateral to prop up the derivatives, which are propping up the stock market? Well, the Fed's solution to that is they are now lending the securities back to the dealers on a short-term overnight basis and taking cash in return. So on the one hand, they're printing money to buy the securities. On the other hand, they're lending them back to the dealers overnight so they can post as collateral. That's how bad things are.
So they're reselling all these fraudulent financial instruments again.
Well, technically relending, but they're making them available through these so-called reverse repos. But that's right. But they buy them permanently by printing money, and then they lend them back temporarily. You say, why would you do that? Well, it's so that they can have collateral to support the derivatives books to prop up the stock market. This is, I'm actually, maybe I've been doing this too long, but I actually understand all these technicalities. It's what I do professionally, and right. It's just appalling, and it makes your hair stand on end.
Well, I appreciate you giving us extra time. Next time you come on, we'll just do an hour. We got about a minute or two left before break. I can't wait to read the book, but expanding on that, talking to the people in the CIA, talking to the folks in the military intelligence. I talked to some of those people as well. Most of them are compartmentalized, have never done anything wrong, have actually tried to help the country. And I mean, now they're having this big discussion about, is this on purpose or was it by design? I mean, I think in a complex system, you're going to have people playing every point of the board. So I think the answer is it's everything. Right. But we better decide to get back to freedom and back to justice, or we're going to go off the edge, as you said, into a hyper-fascism. I mean, what are people saying to you about the future of this country? Because in a fascist system, nobody's safe. We should all not want to go this direction.
Well, I had a meeting in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and I told a very senior official there, I said, look, the day will come when your destroyer, your cruiser will pull up to a fuel depot in Singapore, and you'll say to the operator, fill her up with fuel, and the operator will say, fine, pay me in special drawing rights, pay me in SDRs. And for the first time, you're going to have a forward deployed military that you have to finance in a currency that you don't print. And that was shocking to this very senior official. And then this individual said to me, you know, I hear you, it does sound like a national security threat, but the Treasury really doesn't like it when we talk about the dollar. In other words, that's the compartmentalization where the military and the intelligence are leaving the dollar to the Treasury, but they're the ones who are destroying the dollar.
James Rickards, thank you so much for the time. The Death of Money, the new book. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, that was a powerful interview by an insider. We'll be back with your phone calls, a ton of news, and more. I'm Alex Jones. Strap yourselves in. This is for real.
We're on the march. The empire's on the